Today's lecture, Uniqueness versus Universalism in Jewish History, Combating the Forces of Assimilation.
What I intend to do today is to invite you on a fast journey through centuries of Jewish history to follow through some fundamental issues related to the Jewish people, and then to come to certain conclusions regarding the present time and the future time and how to fight assimilation. Because, as I mentioned already over the last days several times, assimilation is, without any doubt, the greatest enemy of the Jewish people, the people of Israel. It's known, a very sad fact, that Jews lost, through assimilation, over the centuries, lost more Jewish sons and daughters than in all the wars and persecutions and pogroms, including even the terrible Holocaust, the recent Holocaust. Altogether, more people have been lost for the Jewish nation through assimilation than through all wars and pogroms and holocausts. So therefore it's obvious that our main enemy everywhere, worldwide, including Israel, unfortunately, because Israel, as it turned out, does not give any protection against assimilation. Many people have the wrong view that as long as they settled in Israel, so they are safe vis-a-vis assimilation. It's absolutely not true, because Israel, being unfortunately a secular country founded by people with socialistic Marxist ideology, is not giving any protection against alien influences, against alien culture in Israel, and it's not giving any protection, any prevention of for the young people, for the young generation to leave Israel and settle elsewhere, and then, of course, they assimilate physically, intermarry faster even than those Jews who never have been in Israel. So, without any doubt, and that's not an opinion, that's a firm fact, we cannot deny facts, we have to accept them as they are, objectively. The number one enemy of the Jewish people is assimilation, and whatever can be done to fight assimilation, to limit assimilation, is absolutely necessary to do, and the faster the better. There are two contradicting features of Jews, of the Jewish people, which can be followed through millennia of Jewish history, beginning from the very first Jew, Avraham Avinu. The most typical thing, since Avraham Avinu discovered one God and spent all his life in spreading this knowledge, in explaining to other people, in teaching other people, in the beginning outside Israel and later in the land of Israel. Everything he did was absolutely unique, was different than all other people of his generation. So uniqueness was the first characteristic of Avraham Avinu, the first Jew, and he accomplished this uniqueness in a full degree. If the Torah is referring to Avraham Avinu as Ivri, which means in a literal translation from Hebrew, one who comes from the other side, so he always was on the other side. The rest of the people, those who didn't yet join him, have been on one side, and Avraham Avinu and his followers have been on the other side. And you know, of course, the famous question, half joke, half question, whether the Torah is describing, whether the Chumash is describing how was Avraham Avinu dressed. And some people argue you cannot find any reference to the closest to the dress of Avraham Avinu, and others say, of course, it's absolutely obvious, because he was dressed differently than all other people of his generation, because he was different in anything, in everything, also in the external appearance. And that's, of course, true. So we cannot probably reconstruct exactly how Avraham Avinu was dressed, because some people do it in all kinds of books, in books for children. They present a picture of Avraham Avinu, and of course he is dressed differently than other people, but whether it's precise or not, nobody can give a guarantee, but that doesn't mean anything. That's not important. Important is that in everything he was behaving different than other people, and of course he was fulfilling all the commandments as it is known many, many years before the Torah was given, many years before they became real, substantial commandments. He fulfilled it because he came to the full Torah, so knowledge of the full Torah himself, and was not only knowing Torah and teaching Torah, but accomplishing Torah in practical life. Also, he, except of Bris Milah and some other things, he didn't get a direct commandments from God. He just knew what Torah is and went by Torah. So here we see absolute, full, complete, perfect uniqueness. Different, everything is different. The belief, first of all, the belief is different, and the behavior is different, and the appearance is different, everything is different, everything is unique, and that's one of the conditions of his success. The same goes, of course, for other forefathers, for Yitzchak and for Yaakov. And the other trend, the opposite trend, which is universalism, haven't been present yet in the forefathers. It came later. But over the history, and specifically several generations after the forefathers, the other trend was manifested quite strongly. And up to this day, we know that under certain circumstances, when a Jew is, for this or other reason, leaving the uniqueness, abandoning the uniqueness, he is becoming a universalist. He is fighting for being similar to other people, exactly the opposite of what Avraham Avinu did. Fight for becoming a citizen of the world, somebody who goes by universal culture, by universal education, and so on and so forth. It's interesting, those days in the weekly portion of the Torah, we live very much with Yosef. Yosef, as it's known, was combining actually both trends, because he was ruling over the entire Egypt, the strongest and largest, most powerful country of the world at that time. And of course, he had to be modern and behave modern and know all the laws and culture of Egypt, but he didn't compromise. He was one of the unique examples in Jewish history which teach us that it is possible in principle to know universal culture, to know universal behavior, appearance, but not necessarily to adopt it. It's a different thing. You can know, you can study, you can understand the alien culture, but you don't accept it. You don't go by that. For yourself, you keep the uniqueness. And that was, of course, the very special case of Yosef, who did know how to combine, who did not compromise, who also is called Ivri, coming from the other side, the same as Avraham Avinu. So those are the two characteristic trends in Jewish history, and we can analyze history from different perspectives. We can analyze history from different points of view. One of them is our today's journey through Jewish history, when we will compare the influence of two trends and how did it manifest itself in different generations, in different times. One is the positive trend, which has to do with the mere existence of the Jewish people. That's how Jews will come to this point in a minute or two, how the Jewish people came into existence as a people, not as individuals, as it was in the case of Avraham Avinu. It wasn't yet a people. Jews became a people much later. But the foundation, the fundamental principle of the Jewish people at its birth, at its first appearance, was of course the trend to uniqueness. Absolute, perfect uniqueness. And the other is the destructive force, the centrifugal force, which is making a Jew more distant from the sources, from the roots, and that is a trend for universalism. In every generation, and you will see an amazing and even frightening thing, when Jews are influenced by universalism, when they give to this destructive force freedom to act and to expand, usually it leads to terrible catastrophes, to terrible things, events in Jewish history. So what about later generations? We spoke about the forefathers. We spoke about believe in one God, in monotheism. We spoke about Yosef. What about the moment of Jews becoming a people? And that is, of course, related to revelation on Mount Sinai, when Jews ultimately, and I'm not going into details, and I believe that in this audience it's not necessary because everybody knows himself and studies it and remembers, but when Jews are finally out of Egypt and they are standing around Mount Sinai and Moshe Rabbeinu is receiving the Torah, and Jews, as it's well known, are responding Naaseh v'nishma. Jews are prepared to go by Torah, to accept the Torah's laws before they even properly understood what is the Torah about, what is written, what's demanded from them. Naaseh v'nishma. And that is, of course, an extreme manifestation of uniqueness. You hardly can find any other people, and as you know, the Torah itself tells us that Torah was offered to other people, and they did demand to know what's written in the Torah, and they decided the Torah is not for them because their behavior, their character is in severe contradiction with the demands of the Torah, and they couldn't commit themselves to go by Torah, and they rejected Torah. And only Jews answered Naaseh v'nishma, and although Jews themselves and other people, Gentiles, are very frequently assuming that Jews are a very rational people going by precise calculation, what's desirable, what's not desirable. But history shows in the critical moments of history, on the turns of history, Jews knew how to elevate themselves beyond the earthly level and be highly irrational, relying on higher spiritual values and neglecting all the earthly values. And that's, of course, the highlight of that was the moment of receiving Torah, the moment of Naaseh v'nishma, and that's how Jews became people in a completely different way. The uniqueness here is absolutely outstanding, because normally a people becomes a people after living on a certain territory and developing relationship and developing economy and industry and agriculture, and then ultimately they are forming over a number of generations, they are becoming a people. Jews are standing in the desert around the mountain, the Sinai mountain, and they are receiving the new teachings. They didn't yet study the teaching, but they accept the teaching because it's a divine teaching, because it's given by God himself through Moshe Rabbeinu, and they answer Naaseh v'nishma. Nothing can be more unique and more special than this moment in Jewish history. And of course, therefore, Jews are successful, and for next number of generations they go by Torah, although the trend to universalism, as you know, was manifested very soon after receiving the Torah, unfortunately. And I don't want to go to this deeper, but the universalism, first of all, was expressed already in the desert before even they came to their own land. Now, after Jews settled in Israel, and after they had already a king, so I'm skipping the generation of Shaul HaMelech, although you could find there also some expressions, some manifestation of universalism. But then it comes the splendid era of David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, and of course all that was under the sign of uniqueness and preserving the uniqueness. But in later generations, already quite soon, the universalism trend started expressing itself stronger and stronger. And I'm jumping over a number of generations, and I'm coming to Golus Bavel. Jews have been conquered, and they became slaves of the Babylonians. Golus Bavel lasted less than a century. But the trend to universalism, as it's well known from Torah itself, as it's well known from Megillah Esther, from the story of Purim, the trend to assimilation, the trend to become as all other nations, the trend to use the opportunity in Bavel to become high governmental officials, businessmen, and so on, it was very, very destructive. And you know what tragedies that caused. Thank God, Herman didn't succeed in his plan, but he was preparing a Holocaust which was more terrible and more universal, more complete than the Holocaust we knew in this generation, the last generation. It didn't happen because of certain reasons, as described by Torah, as described by Megillah Esther. But the fact remains a fact that assimilation in those several decades, just several decades of slavery, several decades of Golus, created almost a full destruction of the Jewish people, so that the great leader Ezra, when finally it was possible to go back to Israel and to build the second Beis HaMikdash, to renew the normal Jewish life, he was very, very careful in selecting those people who are allowed to go, those who did not assimilate, those who kept their Jewishness. And as it is known, he hardly found 40,000 from the entire nation. The number of those who returned and ultimately built the second Beis HaMikdash, it was a frightening small number, only 40,000 Jews. Out of those many, many hundreds of thousands or maybe millions who have been taken away from Israel just a number of decades before. So you see how destructive this trend to universalism, to become as other nations, how terribly it is in practice. And that's not a theory. You know, I'm trying to analyze history, not as a historian. As you know, as I told you already, my profession is neither history nor humanities in general. I'm a physicist, so I approach history purely from the empirical, experimental point of view. Just fact, just what is absolutely undisputable. And that was a very, very, very important turning point in Jewish history. The going into Golus Bavel and then returning from the Golus Bavel, when we could see by very sad facts, by very sad numbers, that altogether from the entire Jewish people, only 40,000 remained strict adherents of the Jewish law, of mitzvahs, of the Torah, and those have been people who built again the Jewish nation, built again the Beis HaMikdash and Jewish life. Well, you know that just a few centuries later there was another test of the strengths of Jews and their ability to keep uniqueness, and that's what I mentioned already in my previous talks briefly. That's all what Hanukkah is related to. But this time it was not the Babylonians, it was the Greeks, and the Greek culture and the Greek education have been very, very powerful, because the Greeks viewed themselves as a most enlightened nation, and those whose mission is to spread culture and arts and sports and all that, unfortunately found a very important place on the Holy Land of Israel. And that was the whole dispute and the whole fight between those who have been continuing to adhere to Jewish values and the opposite side, the Misyavnim, those who adopted the Greek culture and wanted to spread it and wanted to teach it. Again, what came out of it? In addition to the fact that so many Jews left the spiritual values characteristic for Jewish uniqueness, what happened to Jews physically in everyday life? Tragedies, killing, catastrophes. Again, another historical fact which cannot be denied. Only when Jews are adhering to Torah in a perfect way, if they obey their uniqueness and strengthen their uniqueness and fight for their uniqueness, they are successful. Everything is okay, everything is going well. The moment the second trend, the universalism, is becoming stronger, tragedies start immediately. And again, ultimately, thank God, Jews have been saved as a people. Many individuals have been killed, unfortunately, but as a nation, Jews survived. And the Beis HaMikdash was renewed and cleaned, and the services started again. And there have been again few centuries of prosperity and few centuries of relative peace and success and progress, up to the next tragedy, up to the tragedy caused by Rome, and the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and the beginning of the present Golus, which still lasts, unfortunately. We hope that those are the very last minutes of the Golus, but unfortunately we are still deep in the Golus, even if we are seconds before coming of Mashiach. But this moment is still not the days of Mashiach, but rather the days of Golus, and the very, very dark Golus. But before I go to this day's events, let's analyze a little further. I spoke already quite at length about the current wave of assimilation, the current wave and tendency of universalism, and that started, of course, about 220 years ago with a scholar, which I already mentioned in my talk several times. The Maskilim again put as a top priority in their activities the trend to universalism, not uniqueness, not preserving the very specific, very clean, very isolated Jewish education in yeshivas, but rather the opposite, to destroy yeshivas, to expose young generation of Jews to universal, alien values of a culture based on Gentiles' approaches, not Jewish values. And as we spoke already, the descendants, in the beginning it looked maybe not so terrible, it was just the attempt to mix something a little bit, add something to Jewish culture, but as the Rebbe is teaching in one of the sikhs related to Hanukkah, when the Rebbe refers to the story of the one jar of kosher oil in the Beis HaMikdash which was found, the Rebbe is making a very, very strong point that the Greeks didn't mix anything into the oil. They didn't change the chemical composition of the oil. All they did, making the oil impure, making the oil tome, that they touched it. And that's because oil is compared to wisdom and education. You're supposed to keep the education so clean and so special that you don't have to allow, not only, God forbid, to mix something into the oil, into the Jewish education, into the Jewish teaching. You are not allowed to a goy and goyishkeit even to touch it from outside. If it's not properly sealed, it's not properly isolated. And the Maskilim, of course, did exactly the opposite, and as we spoke already, the descendants of Maskilim in Europe mostly assimilated physically, intermarried and disappeared. The descendants of Maskilim in Eastern Europe, in Russia and Poland, have been divided in two categories. One became communist ultimately and made the revolution in Russia, and the others became secular Zionists and established a secular state several generations later, in the land of Israel. So going for a moment back to the events in Russia, they made the revolution. We spoke about it at greater length yesterday. And after the revolution, just 2 years after the revolution, a Jewish section of the Communist Party was established, Yev Sekция. It's very sad, but known from history, that those two who signed the new regulation about establishing a Jewish section and about destruction of Jewish communities, before the revolution, the Jewish community of a village, of a small town, of a bigger town, was everything, was regulating the Jewish life. It was a source of justice and social support and so on. So 2 years after the revolution, it was a special law accepted which spoke about establishing of a Jewish section of the Communist Party, and simultaneously about abandoning, about dissolving, destroying the Jewish communities. Who signed this decree? Two people. One was Stalin, and the second was a Jew called Savely Agursky. He was a communist. He emigrated from Russia to America before the revolution. Then after the revolution, he rushed back to Moscow, and he had nothing better to do but to sign a decree about destroying Jewish communities, which meant the beginning of the end of Jewish life in Russia. For 10 years, and that's still not enough presented in literature, not enough known, for 10 years, Jews, only Jews who belonged to the Jewish section, all of them spoke Yiddish, had nothing to do, nothing better to do, but persecute rabbis, Talmidei Chachomim, Jewish authors, Jewish thinkers, yeshiva bochers, destroying physically synagogues, converting synagogues and all other types of buildings. They worked about 10 years, from 1919 up to 1929, and the results of their work was absolutely devastating. After that, the Russian government adopted a different policy. Suddenly everything, they already destroyed all the spiritual forces. All those who had been able to teach, to spread Jewish knowledge, haven't been more present, or some of them have been sitting in jails, have been sitting in camps in Siberia. They couldn't do anything. At that moment, they changed their policies. They suddenly announced that there is a total and unlimited freedom for Jews. Jews can study at every university. Jews can become great communists at the top of the national leadership. Jews can go and do any kind of activity. For about 10 years, from 1929 till the beginning of the Second World War in 1941, more than 10 years, 12, 13 years, Jews really physically, professionally prospered in Russia. And every meaningful position, practically most of the meaningful and important positions, have been occupied by Jews. That caused, of course, quite a lot of disappointment in the local people and Gentiles. They've been opposed to that. But that was a fact, that in every area you could take sciences, you could take music, you could take medicine, you could take economy, whatever, industry, everywhere on the top position you could find a Jew. So much that Jews even spoke the Russian language much better than the Russians themselves. The Moscow radio was dominated by speakers who have all been Jews. The most famous have been Jewish. And that, of course, accelerated even more the trend to universalism. Jews suddenly decided that it's a paradise. All the possibilities are open. They can become very famous, very successful, very accomplished. And every Jewish father and mother tried to send the son or daughter to an appropriate faculty at a university, that they would acquire a profession and then work in the profession, accomplish themselves and progress. And of course, that was another reason to abandon completely those families who still succeeded to keep a little bit Yiddishkeit, a little bit knowledge, tried to get rid of it because they have been frightened that can spoil the career of their son or daughter. And they wouldn't even tell, if not the inscript in the identity card, in the passport, those young Jews would hardly know that they are Jewish. The only difference was that they, maybe that was a great muzzle that it was done by the communists, that they demanded that every person would carry permanently an identity card, and this identity card was making a very straight and non-equivocal statement that they are Jewish. Maybe that was one of the positive outcomes, although the intentions have been, of course, negative. Now then, after it was the Second World War, was all what happened during the war, and Jews participated very, very actively in the war, and many people have been killed on the battlefields, and many became heroes of the Soviet Union. There's a great number of, there's the highest award has been in the communist country, the hero of the Soviet Union, and I don't remember exactly the statistics, but many hundreds of Jews got this highest award for their participation on the battlefields of the Second World War. And then, as it happened in the previous instances, the revenge came, the reckoning came. After the Second World War, suddenly Stalin changed his policy vis-à-vis Jews. Again, a turn 180 degrees, and suddenly it was an official persecution of Jews, an official call to get rid of Jews. It escalated from year to year, endless articles in newspapers, radio programs, everything against Jews, although Jews haven't been even named as Jews, but they invented all kinds of other terms how to refer to Jews. So much that ultimately in 1953 there was a doctor's plot, this famous trial. They announced that Jewish doctors, famous doctors in the Kremlin, high close to the government, intended to kill all the communist leaders. And of course that caused a violent, a gigantic wave of anti-Semitism, hatred, and Stalin already prepared trains, many trains on all the railway stations to take out all the Jews from European part of the Soviet Union and transfer them somewhere, nobody knew exactly where, far into the east, in Siberia. But thank God, at a proper moment, really last moment when it's possible still to save the situation, Stalin died, and everything came back more or less to normal, as much as it could be normal under the communists. So again, we see an absolutely striking fact. Jews are leaving their Jewishness. They are becoming universalists instead of being adherents of uniqueness, stressing and strengthening their uniqueness. They are going after universalism, after other nations, after alien culture and teaching. And that leads not only to assimilation, not only to catastrophe from the spiritual, from the Jewish point of view, but that leads also to physical destruction of Jews. And I mentioned yesterday that nobody knows yet the exact number, but there is an assumption that probably about 3 million Jews have been killed in different ways, in camps, in jail, and by shooting on the spot without trial, and so on. Of course, assimilation and the trend to become as all other nations is characteristic not only in the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union it was forced by the government, it was an official policy, but the situation is not much different, say, in the United States. It's known that the percent of mixed marriages and intermarriages in the United States nowadays exceeds already 60%. It's absolutely frightening, and nobody knows. It was originally about 6 million Jews in the United States, and officially it's still more or less the same number, 5.5 million, 6 millions. But who are halachically Jews among those 6 millions? Probably much less than half, maybe only 2 millions, maybe 2.5 millions. Nobody knows precisely because it's very difficult to get those numbers. And in the United States, the prosperity of Jews and equal chances to succeed, equal opportunities are expressed very, very strong. And of course, that's a major reason, major force leading to assimilation. Jews contributed enormously to the civilization of the United States and the whole world. It's enough, for instance, to bring an example that among Nobel Prize winners, the United States has the greatest in the world number of Nobel Prize winners, more than any other country. On the second place was the Soviet Union. Now, when in the Soviet Union the situation is too bad economically, sciences don't develop so fast, so therefore they are not getting so many Nobel laureates as they did in the past. But in the United States, anyway, in all times of the 20th century, there was the greatest number of Nobel Prize winners. And Jews, constituting only 2% of the entire population of the United States, won more than 50% of the Nobel Prizes. So it's a disproportion by a factor of 30. The number of Jews is 30 times less than Gentiles, and the number of Nobel Prize winners among Jews is more than 50, close to 60% of all Nobel Prize winners. So one can say, wonderful, it's such a great success, but what is the price? Take one by one those Nobel Prize winners. It turns out that from the Jewish point of view, they have been completely lost. Take the most famous, mentioned the name several times when we discussed sciences, Einstein. Einstein was, of course, halachically himself, he was 100% Jewish, but his children, his descendants, all of them are goyim. Nothing. The family of Einsteins doesn't exist. It disappeared. And you can check almost on every other Nobel Prize winner. So yes, the person himself, maybe his great accomplishments have been because in his family, his father or his grandfather spent days and nights in studying Torah and developed the mind, and it was a tradition of learning and applying the mind for good and complicated things. And that may be brought to the great success of the grandchild. Very possible. It's one of the ways to explain why Jews are so talented and so able and so much able to get the highest level in many sciences and other areas, and so many are Nobel Prize winners. That's certainly a result of an intellectual training over the generation and generation of the same family. But what next? His children are already nothing, neither Jews nor even great scientists, just regular people. For the Jewish nation, they are lost. Sadly enough and painfully enough, well, the same goes, of course, to other great personalities you can take on the other extreme. Freud, for instance. I'm not speaking about the theory of Freud, which is quite controversial, but he's certainly one of the most famous personalities in the 20th century. And again, the same with his family, no continuity, nothing from the Jewish point of view. But the same goes also to the Zionist leaders. For instance, take Ben Gurion, the founder of the Jewish state. Except of 2 grandchildren, all the rest of the family is out of Israel and is already intermarried. So Zionism, secular Zionism, Zionism is deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition. And every Jew who prays 3 times a day for coming back to Zion and so on. But that's a different idea of Zionism. It's Zionism based on Torah, Zionism based on the idea of the Holy Land. Secular Zionism is leaving a Jew absolutely unarmed. He has no arms to protect him as a Jew. He has no means to fight for his Jewishness. Now, of course, speaking about all those threats of assimilation and all what's going on in this generation, one has to look also onto the other extreme. We are here in a Chabad institution, and it should be mentioned that in the Soviet Union, even under Stalin, when teaching Torah was punishable by death, without even a trial, death on spot, just 3 people have been sitting down and deciding that the person is guilty, and he was shot on the spot half an hour after the verdict. At that time, Chabad was maintaining Jewish schools, Jewish institutions of Torah studies in full secrecy, under conditions that parents didn't know where the child is. And thousands of Jewish children over the years got this very, very substantial, maybe not so full and not so perfect and as in a free open yeshiva as it's here in the yeshiva where we are having our sessions now. But certainly they got the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, and that determines their entire lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren. That was something remarkable. When I first got to know, still in the Soviet Union, that there have been schools, Jewish schools, yeshivas, in the strict, fully sealed underground, somewhere far, far away, thousands of kilometers east of Moscow, and that they existed even under Stalin, I simply couldn't understand. If I would know nothing about Chabad but this fact, that Chabad succeeded in maintaining Jewish schools under Stalin, that would be good enough to even not ask any other questions, but run and join Chabad movement, because only those who have been in Russia know how terrible the regime was and what was the feeling of going in the streets and permanently shivering because you can be put any moment in jail with a reason, without a reason. How many people have been killed without any reason? So how much more those who knew that they are organizing Jewish schools and they are dedicating their entire lives and they are managing those schools. How have they lived being exposed to deadly threats day and night? That's difficult to appreciate. Those who grew up in Australia or other free country probably cannot understand it rationally, but to have the feeling, I believe, is possible only for those who have been living under the KGB. I very vividly still remember, it's many years ago, but I remember very vividly there's a terrible feeling, and what heroes should be those people who maintained the Jewish education there. And what was the motive? The motive to preserve uniqueness, to preserve this principle which is a source of Jewish life, to oppose universalism, not to become as all other goyim, as all our other nations. And one very interesting parallel about the Rebbe himself, I spoke in the beginning about Yosef, that Yosef in Egypt knew perfectly how to combine both trends, to know universal culture, to know the laws of Egypt, to be able to manage the whole country, and at the same time not to compromise in anything, to remain a Jew and every coming from the other side, belonging to the other side. I think the same we are finding in our Rebbe, because the Rebbe is not involved in any part of life, of whether it's America or other countries, social life, cultural life, typical for Goyim. At the same time, nobody knows better and can predict better all aspects of everyday life, whether it's in business or sciences or trade or economy or whatever, politics, wars, than our Rebbe. And of course, the Rebbe in his personal life, it's difficult to say because the Rebbe doesn't have a personal life, his life is fully dedicated to Jews. There is absolutely not 0.01% of any compromise, of course. Absolute, perfect, full dedication to uniqueness and nothing more. Well, where it's all going, this process which we detected all through Jewish history, this fight between uniqueness and universalism. First of all, some rational considerations. Of course, ultimately, no doubt that the trend of uniqueness will conquer, will win the historical battle. First of all, because it's promised by Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it couldn't be otherwise. It's the destiny of the Jewish people, but also rationally, purely demographically. Take, for instance, in Israel or even in the diaspora in other countries. Only in those families which are going by Torah, which are keeping the trend of uniqueness, there is high birth rate. Those families, Baruch Hashem, have 10 and sometimes 15 children and even more, while all those who are outsiders, who have the opposite trend, they are putting the limit of the existence of their family just because of a very, very low birth rate. So no doubt that over the years, the number, the percentage, the relative weight of those who are going by uniqueness is going to become greater and greater. That's a very rational, objective process which is impossible to deny. That's pure and firm statistics. It's very interesting to mention that the fact that Jews are protected by God and are so unique and are able to survive under any circumstances is widely recognized by Gentiles. Sometimes we don't recognize what the Gentiles see clearly. It's an historic fact. The Prussian Emperor Friedrich the Great, who was a benefactor of arts and sciences and philosophers, he once decided that he wanted to ask the thinkers around him to give him a proof of existence of God. He demanded, give me a best and convincing proof that God exists. And he got dozens of answers which didn't suit him. He rejected all of them. Then one of his philosophers, which had been close to him, came with a suggestion. He says, I have a perfect proof of existence of God. What is it? The eternity of the Jewish people. Because if no God, if no supernatural events, Jews wouldn't exist, wouldn't survive all those 3,000 years. And Friedrich the Great was a quite clever man. He was not only a supporter of philosophers, but himself a little bit a philosopher. This time he was satisfied. He told, yes, I accept this argument, I accept this idea. Certainly that's the best possible proof of the existence of God. Jews are manifesting by their mere existence that there is a God in the world, a God who protects and directs the people of Israel. All what I was talking over the last 45 minutes, I stress it again. It's not a theory. It's not that I developed an idea and I try to convince you, indoctrinate, brainwash you. Those are historical facts. And whether one is pleased by those facts or not, whether he likes them or not, whether he accepts them or not, the fact is still remaining a fact. The Jewish nation, the Jewish people can survive, can be successful, can avoid destruction only if they are unique, if they keep their being different. Why? Of course, the most normal and obvious answer is because that's how God wanted us to be. But even for those who don't accept and don't want yet, I'm saying yet because there's always possibility to make tshuva and move forward, those who don't yet accept this explanation, take an example. Why don't you ask, for instance, or protest against the idea that for a human being it's absolutely necessary to breathe, to have oxygen? It sounds also very, very strange and unjustified. If a person doesn't have oxygen, he dies, God forbid, in several minutes. But we accept it as fact of life. No normal person would put on his head a nylon bag and suffocate because he knows that's how we're built. Why? We don't know. That's how it is. The same is, of course, with the uniqueness. We are meant to be unique. We are meant to be different. Why? That's a different question. There can be many explanations, and of course the true one is the Torah explanation, but that may be not clear yet for all people. So take it, accept it as a given fact, as an empirical experimental evidence. And of course, very soon Mashiach will be revealed, and then the earth will be full, as the Rambam writes, of knowledge of God, and then everybody will accept it not only as an empirical fact, but also a fact which stems from the teaching of the Torah. Thank you very much. Yes.
Surely, to my mind, the Rebbe's view was that we should fight assimilation, because I think they're different.
Well, I mentioned in my talk exactly what you are saying. The Rebbe knows better than any person in the world how to achieve success, also for Goyim, for their activities, how to direct Goyim in the right direction. Because the Rebbe is the greatest specialist, not only in Torah and not only in Jewish life, but in every event, in every kind of activity on earth. But I also suggested this comparison with Yosef, who was the leader, the ruler in Egypt, which made it necessary for him to know perfectly everything which is related to the life in Egypt, culture in Egypt, but that didn't mean that he is compromising. So I already made this point, which is absolutely the same as you are saying.
But isn't that a universalism in a sense?
Why?
Because
There is nothing wrong even for an ordinary Jew, not only for a Rebbe, to know perfectly the sequence of events and to be able to make predictions and to give instructions, as long as a person is not adopting this universe, this alien culture and alien behavior for himself. It's not bad. Mordechai in Bovel also knew perfectly all the rules of the king and all the behavior, but he didn't follow anything. He didn't. When it was terrible danger for the Jewish nation, he didn't go to the king and ask mercy, gather tens of thousands of Jewish children to learn Torah. So that's exactly what the Rebbe is doing. Other questions? Yes.
What would you say to the argument, in a long way, so what would you say to the argument of those people who suggest that we should be totally unfree?
I'm afraid that the same question would just have been asked. And I don't know why do you try to put in my mouth things which I certainly didn't say. Absolutely not. The point was that it's absolutely necessary to keep Jewish education clean and unique, that it's absolutely necessary to go in your personal life by the laws of Torah, which are unique and different. That doesn't mean that one doesn't have to be involved in practical activities, in business, in parnasa, and so on. That's two different things. You can do it, but you have to learn from many personalities in Jewish history. When Yankov Avinu came from Lovan, he also told that he was involved there, but he was only living there. He didn't become a part of this alien life. So it's a difference. You can know, you can go by when you are dealing with business in a Gentile environment. Of course, you have to know perfectly all the laws and all the ways which lead to success. But you don't adopt the behavior of the goyim which surround you. It's very, very clear. You are not impressed by the world. You recognize the existence of the world. It's objective. It's necessary for you to understand it, and you don't adopt it in your personal life. You don't agree to that.
That's the right way. Some people tell me they're scared. They said if I would be Yaakov Avinu or Yosef Hatzadik or whatever, then I could do it. But isn't it? Some people claim it's dangerous.
Well, of course, not everyone can become a Moshe Rabbeinu or Yaakov Avinu or so on. That's obvious, and there is a certain danger. But this is the whole chokhmah of being educated properly, that you know well what is the borderline, what is permitted and what's not permitted, and the better you are educated, the cleaner your education was, the stronger you are when you face the real world. But of course, it's unthinkable that any Jew, and especially Chabad, would isolate themselves from the whole idea is to go out and to spread the words of Torah in the marketplace, not in somewhere in a palace. Yes.
I'm very interested in your empirical analysis of history. And you quoted the examples of the Greeks and Babylon, and for example in Russia, where the Jews got very close to the center of power, and then they turned around against it. That happened. I think that was common. There's been many other examples
Yes.
like that. I just wonder if you have any comments or anything you'd like to say about the current situation. We've seen in the last decade or so a move, for example, to the center of power by Jews in the United States. I think anyone with with their eyes open can see that the Jews are very influential in the United States government, very senior positions throughout the United States government, most powerful country in the world. This wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago. Now, what can happen is two things, I think. Like, the Jews can just be accepted and continuation of assimilation, and then the religious Jews in the United States will continue with Judaism, and that will continue down that track. The other Jews will be just assimilated. Or there can be a type of a backlash, where the pendulum can shift, as it did in the examples you quoted, and there can be a physical attack on Jews, or there can be some sort of violent backlash, as well as assimilation. It's quite possible, in my view. It's possible. I don't know. Maybe because America is call it a democracy and so on. Maybe it can't happen. Maybe it won't happen. I'm just wondering if you have.
Well, first of all, I can only say that what you are saying, your remarks are absolutely correct, and nobody can refute them. It's a fact. It's a very well-known fact. That's a part of this process of assimilation, of getting more and more involved in the matters, in the business of another nation, which is not actually the purpose of Jews, which is contradicting. It's happening, by the way, not only in America, but surprisingly even in contemporary Russia, because everybody knows that the current Prime Minister, Primakov, is halachically is Jewish. His both parents are. Primakov was his the second husband of his Jewish mother. His father was Jewish also, so both parents are Jewish. And there are several other ministers still in the government, and deputy ministers and so on. That only stresses even more the facts I was bringing. Now, where it's going, I'm not a prophet and I'm not the one who can make such forecasts, but judging from the past, I'm afraid that nothing good can come out of this, because certainly it's only an additional reason to anticipate even stronger assimilation, which we see already in the present time. So certainly it will be even amplified in the future. And how can it be stopped? I think only by spreading genuine Jewish education and appealing to Jews that that's not their business and not their line of behavior. That's not what they should try for.
In each case in the past, there's been a violent or a suppression.
Well, let's hope it's not. You know, we all pray and wish that everything would be smooth as much as possible. In addition, we shouldn't make such many-year forecasts, because we all believe that Mashiach is imminent and already here, as the Rebbe teaches, and therefore we don't have to deal with such. We have to, of course, today we have to do everything, even if it's seconds before Geula, we have to still fight against assimilation. But in our feeling, in our forecasting of the future, we should also take in consideration that we are very, very close to the days of Mashiach. Yes. Okay, you will be after. Yeah.
My name is Shlomo from the Seven.
Very nice meeting you.
One of them, as you said, about two-thirds of the Jewish, about the Jewish, against religion and against all things.
Well, both questions. First of all, what can be done against assimilation in America and so on? And the second was what's about Israel, where some Jews are adopting a line, politics, which are in absolute contradiction, not only with Jewish principles, but I would say with common sense, because to give away territory and endanger all the Jews who live in Israel, to give the land away to those who are officially and openly proclaiming that their final purpose is to throw us in the sea. So it's, sometimes people really believe, and the Torah says it, that Jews have to be light for other nations and source of wisdom. But when a Jew is abandoning his Torah foundations of his life, so he's certainly becoming not better but much worse than other nations, because I don't know any nation in the world, European or American or whatever, who would do this to themselves. This masochistic behavior is absolutely testifying to something very, very, to a certain mental sickness. I don't know how it can be explained. No one in his personal life would do something similar. You deal with a murderer, you invite him to occupy one room in your apartment, and you believe he will start loving you for that. You just make him easier to kill you, that's all. So what can be done? There is no other means but to spread Jewish education again and again, what I repeat already several times. Yes, your question, please. Okay, this gentleman makes a point that I mentioned in my talk, that Stalin in 1948 made a sudden turn regarding official governmental anti-Semitism. So he is referring to the fact that Stalin has been an anti-Semite also before, but just for political reasons he had for a certain time hidden his real feelings, and then in 1948 it came out. Yeah, the ladies, maybe I should accept one or two. Yes. Yeah, for those who didn't hear the question, it's how to if children are taught secular studies, given secular studies, how to present the secular knowledge so that it would do less harm. Well, to really explain the subject, I would need another lecture at least. But I think briefly I already mentioned it in previous talks, yesterday, the day before yesterday and before. You have to explain to the child that science is not anything like magic or anything like religion. It's just a sophisticated craft. There's nothing special in sciences. And you don't have to worship, you have to understand sciences and use it for practical purposes, but not more than that. And of course you have to avoid in every instance when the scientific position is explained, you have to go by sciences of this century, of the latest developments, latest theories, because as I try to present here, reasoned science is in perfect harmony with the Torah views, and it wasn't the case 100 years ago. The problem is that textbooks and the style of teaching and the ideas behind the teaching, the sciences which are taught, are rather obsolete. That despite the fact that sciences today are in harmony with Torah, the children are still taught the science of the previous century, which seem to contradict Torah. So all that has to be corrected. Well, I'm not recommending this. I'm not advocating the necessity. I think it was quite clearly expressed in my talks that it's fundamentally wrong. But if you cannot avoid it, so at least make the secular studies less harmful. Make it more in harmony with Torah. Yes. Yes, it's very, very simple. Describing the Rebbe's activities, and specifically the Rebbe's knowledge of secular ideas and sciences and secular behavior and secular world, that I use the present tense in referring to the Rebbe. I use always the present tense because I feel, and I'm deeply convinced and believes that the Rebbe is with us, despite the fact that we cannot see him physically. And that's one of the things which is maybe difficult to understand, but I related many times during the last few days to the fact that Torah values and Torah ideas not necessarily are directly and easily perceived by your mind, by your rational mind, because the Torah is higher than mind and understanding. And I personally feel, and I believe that others also do so, that the Rebbe is with us and guiding us, and without that, tremendous success of Chabad worldwide, the growth of Chabad institutions for learning and other institutions is remarkable, despite all the odds, despite all the difficulties which the emissaries are facing, and the fact that thousands and maybe tens of or hundreds of thousands of people are getting answers and advice and guidance from the Rebbe, just putting a letter with questions into one of his books of the Rebbe's letter, and that works perfectly on all 5 continents and many other things. I believe I will speak more about it tomorrow, but that's why I certainly intentionally, not by mistake, I'm using the present tense. I think that reflects the reality. Yes, please. Little louder. What's the problem? Today is not a fast. I believe everybody ate a good breakfast, so why don't you have power to speak up a little? The question was what about the proselytes, those who are willing to join the Jewish people? It's known that in Judaism nobody ever encouraged or forced other people to become adherents of Torah. But if somebody genuinely is convinced and willing to do so, there are halachic ways how to make the transition to become a Jew. And it's known that there have been great Jews in history. Maybe the most outstanding example is the great sage Rabbi Akiva, who have been proselytes, or their parents have been proselytes. So it's, as long as it's done in accordance with the Torah laws, with the halacha, there is no problems. Any other? Yes, maybe that will be the last question. Yeah, this gentleman is complaining about the fact that despite what I was talking about, necessity, vital necessity to be united and to work unanimously and study Torah together and act and do together, that in reality, unfortunately, it's not always this way. And he says, I certainly cannot judge, I am a guest here, but he refers to some absence of unity here in Melbourne. What should be the attitude and what should be the policy regarding those facts? I think I did answer already more than once that the only answer to those facts, if they are true, and unfortunately in Israel they're certainly true, I hope maybe in Melbourne it's not so severe, but whatever it is, even a slight absence of unity and harmony between Jews is of course very, very harmful. That's the worst thing which can be. And of course the Rebbe is teaching, and I use present tense intentionally, that first of all, the condition for any success in any field, and specifically in bringing closer the revelation of Mashiach, which we all want and all need, because that's the only real solution. All other solutions are temporary and partial. The only real solution is the coming of Mashiach. There are many problems, including, by the way, also scientific problems. We spoke a little bit about preservation of environment and danger for environment. I touched only upon global warming, but there are also many other problems. And that certainly can be solved, and that relates to all mankind, all even living creatures on the earth. That can be done only through the coming of Mashiach, through the revelation of Mashiach. And here, the absolutely dominant condition is unity and mutual love, Ahavas Yisrael. So